Montana farmers are voicing frustrations over the Trump administration's use of tariffs.
A late Friday decision by U.S. President Donald Trump rolling back tariffs on dozens of food products in the face of growing backlash from American consumers over the high cost of groceries.
Affordability, they call it, was a con job by the Democrats. We did a great job on groceries and affordability. The only problem is the fake news. You people don't want to report it.
Potatoes are one of the most misunderstood products in the modern economy. Most people associate them with dinner plates, grocery aisles, or fast food counters. Fries, chips, mashed potatoes. That's the mental image. But that image is incomplete, and that misunderstanding is exactly why the current trade instability between Canada and the United States matters far more than most people realize. This is not a food story. It is an industrial dependency story hiding in plain sight. Canada produces close to 6 million metric tons of potatoes every year. What makes that number important is not volume, but usage. Roughly 70% of Canadian potato production does not end up as fresh food. It is processed. That processing transforms potatoes into industrial inputs that quietly support large portions of the U.S. economy. These inputs move through supply chains invisibly, embedded in products consumers never associate with agriculture. Potato starch is the clearest example. It is a critical thickening and stabilizing agent used in frozen meals, instant soups, sauces, processed meats, dairy products, and baked goods. It also appears in paper manufacturing, textile finishing, adhesives, and pharmaceutical tablets. If you eat packaged food, use household products, or take medication, there is a strong chance potato starch played a role somewhere along that chain. Much of that starch originates in Canadian processing facilities designed specifically to serve U.S. demand. Potatoes also feed industries outside food entirely. Industrial alcohol derived from potatoes is used in sanitizers, cleaning solutions, cosmetics, and medical applications. During periods when grain-based ethanol faced constraints, potato-based alternatives helped fill gaps. Processing byproducts are widely used as animal feed across the northern United States, reducing waste and lowering costs for livestock operations. These streams are not optional extras. They are integrated components of how American industries function efficiently. For decades, this system worked because trade was predictable. Canadian processors invested hundreds of millions of dollars in specialized plants, storage, and logistics infrastructure, with the assumption that U.S. demand was stable and reliable. American buyers structured long-term contracts around that reliability. The relationship was not fragile. It was deeply institutionalized. That stability began to crack when tariff threats entered the equation. The issue is not simply the size of proposed tariffs. It is uncertainty. Processing industries operate on thin margins and long planning cycles. When access to a market can change overnight due to political decisions, companies are forced to reassess risk. They don't wait for disruption. They prepare for it. That reassessment is already happening. Canadian processors have begun adjusting contract volumes, signaling caution to farmers and downstream buyers. While demand fluctuations and inventory cycles are normal, trade uncertainty has become an additional risk factor that cannot be ignored. Businesses exposed to a single unstable market eventually seek diversification, not out of hostility, but out of survival logic. When Canadian suppliers diversify, they do not reduce production. They redirect it. Asian markets have become increasingly attractive. Countries like Japan, South Korea, and several Southeast Asian economies are expanding consumption of processed foods and industrial inputs that meet strict quality standards. These markets prioritize long-term agreements and predictable trade rules. For Canadian suppliers, that predictability is now valuable. Even modest redirection creates pressure. American industries rely on Canadian potato-derived inputs because domestic capacity is already optimized for current demand. Scaling up new processing facilities is expensive and slow. Importing alternatives from Europe increases transportation costs and logistical complexity. As supply tightens, costs rise across multiple sectors simultaneously. Consumers eventually feel that pressure, but rarely in obvious ways. It may appear as reformulated products, reduced package sizes, delayed price increases, or quality adjustments months later. Because potatoes are hidden inside supply chains, the source of those changes is rarely visible. The dependency remains invisible until it becomes unstable. The most critical vulnerability lies further upstream: seed potatoes. These are not interchangeable commodities. Certified seed stock must meet strict disease, genetic, and performance standards. Canadian producers supply the majority of seed potatoes used by American farmers for processing-grade crops. Without timely access to seed, planting windows are missed. Missed planting means lost harvests. Lost harvests compound future shortages. Seed disruptions do not cause immediate headlines. They cause delayed crises. Reduced planting this season becomes reduced supply next year. That reduction impacts not just food production, but starch availability, industrial alcohol supply, and animal feed inputs. Once those cycles break, recovery takes years, not months. Canadian seed producers understand this leverage. If U.S. trade conditions remain unpredictable, alternative markets become more attractive. Other countries want reliable seed stock. Once new supply relationships form, they tend to persist. Supply chains, once reoriented, rarely snap back simply because political conditions change. It is important to be precise. Official data shows that Canadian potato exports fluctuate year to year. Not every decline signals a structural shift. Government agencies have cautioned against drawing conclusions too early, but that caution addresses symptoms, not incentives. The core issue is risk perception. Businesses do not wait for confirmation of damage. They respond to the probability of it. And that probability has increased. When trade policy becomes volatile, dependency becomes liability. Canadian processors are responding rationally by reducing exposure and expanding options. This is not a dramatic break. It is a gradual recalibration. This pattern is not unique to potatoes. It has already appeared in aluminum, critical minerals, and other agricultural products. Potatoes simply expose the issue more clearly because they are so deeply embedded across industries while remaining largely unnoticed by consumers. Canada continues to produce massive volumes of potatoes. Processing facilities remain operational. Supply still exists. What is changing is priority access. Increasingly, Canadian suppliers are treating the U.S. market as one option among many, rather than a guaranteed anchor. The real lesson here is not about food preferences or fast food menus. It is about hidden dependencies. Modern economies rely on inputs most people never think about. When those inputs become unstable, the effects ripple quietly but widely. Potatoes were invisible because they were reliable. They powered industries without drawing attention. But reliability is not permanent. When trade relationships lose predictability, even the most ordinary crop can become a strategic pressure point. This is what happens when supply chains are built on assumptions rather than resilience. Canada is adapting. Its processors are protecting their businesses by diversifying risk. The United States may soon discover that potatoes were never just potatoes. They were infrastructure, and infrastructure, once taken for granted, is expensive to replace.